Good morning. So I've seen new faces, not actually new, our visitor that we've met before. Welcome to New Covenant Church. And today we are in the third chapter of the book of Ruth. So I will tell you a story. There was one time inside the public transportation, a jeepney. Then I saw someone similar to my friend, and then I tried to talk to her. Hello, how are you? And then all of a sudden I realized that there's similarity in the face, but she's not my classmate. And things became so awkward inside the jeepney, and I wish that everything, the world ends at that moment, because the girl really stare at me like, who are you? Why are you talking to me? What are you telling me stories I don't know? And it feels awkward. So today, there's similar to that story in the book of Ruth in chapter 3. So a bit of a recap from last week. Important point is first, Ruth is a Moabite. A Moabite, they're cursed by God. They're sinners. They're alienated to the will of God. In the first place, Moab is a child due to incestuous relationship between Lot and the daughter. So in the first place, they're already cursed. So that's an important note that we need to remember. So Ruth is a Moabite. So there's famine in Bethlehem. They go to Moab, the family of Elimelech with Naomi, with their two sons. And later on, Elimelech died, the two sons died, so Naomi became a widow, and also their two sons were married, and also Orpah and Ruth became widow. So that's the story. So let's move on with chapter 3. So what we know so far is that Naomi said to Ruth that Boaz is the Redeemer. You remember that in the previous chapter? And now Ruth rest on that information that Boaz is the qualified redeemer based on levirate marriage. But now, Boaz is aware that there is someone qualified to fill that position, and it's not him. So, this is the vital information for now. So let's move on with chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" Let's pause there for a moment. We see two things here. Naomi said, "Should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" First, we saw the character of Naomi. Naomi is selfless. And Naomi is consistent in this kind of love. Selfless. From the start, Naomi left the place of Moab. She encouraged this Orpah and Ruth to just remain because there's still a chance that you get married and you look for a husband. And here, Naomi continues to show that kind of love, being selfless towards Ruth. And another that we should look into is, who is the near relative in need of a redeemer? Boaz is of the clan of Elimelech, and the wife of Elimelech is Naomi, and it's not Ruth. Who fits rightly in that position? So that's the question. Not just that, age-wise. You remember how Ruth became daughter zoned by Boaz? Age-wise, Boaz and Naomi were on the same range. So here is Naomi, being consistent in the acts of love, being selfless. Now commanding Ruth to do certain Jewish tradition. It is a Near Eastern custom during their time. So we need to be careful not to do this in our time. So I would like you to take note also that Naomi does just not command these things in verses 2 down all of a sudden. Notice in verse 2, it is not Boaz a relative with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley. Notice the winnowing barley. Tonight at the threshing floor. Naomi and Ruth arrive during the start of the harvest. You remember that? Here is the winnowing process. So there's a month already that Naomi, Boaz, and Ruth continually commune with one another. So it's not all of a sudden that Naomi commands Ruth to go to Boaz and do this. Notice the timeline from harvest to winnowing. It's been a month of Ruth doing the gleaning in the field owned by Boaz. So you can imagine those talks between Ruth and Naomi and Ruth and Boaz and their daily encounter with each other. So it's not all of a sudden. So winnowing is the process where the farmer scooped up the pieces of the crop. He just threshed and threw it all up in the air, and the wind blew the light pieces of stalk to the side, while the grain, which was both heavier and roundish, fell almost straight back down. In our own dialect, we call this nag-ayag. And we saw that picture of a big kanang bilao. What's the Bisaya for that? Bukag is a right word. And then they let all those stalk vanish to the air. So the threshing floor is also an important setting, is an open area covered with piles of grain, stalk, and chaff, which was blown even farther away. So the threshing floor is an open area filled with men doing the winnowing and also to guard those crops. It's like a picture of you're in the middle of Fuente Circle. That's the threshing floor. All the men were busy doing the threshing process. So it's not a secret place, but it's an open place. So now in verse 2, is it not Boaz, a relative, with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So here's the command further of Naomi. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself. In other words, make yourself presentable. And put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But, here's the but, do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Why there's a command to do not make yourself known? There's a risk that is entailed to this process. Ruth is going to a place filled with men, and no woman is in a valid business to be there. And this is what Naomi told Ruth. So this is an open area. The risk is high. So the command further is that do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. This is a good way for us to talk with someone when someone is full and satisfied. So their mind is not preoccupied with food. So it's not the good moment to converse with someone. So far, Naomi showed a selfless love toward Ruth and wants to make things happen. So she led Ruth to a command during their time that will finally redeem her. So Ruth fully submits to it out of her love to Naomi. There's genuine love and concern for each other. So let's go for what's more to this command given by Naomi. In verse 4, when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. And this is another risk. And this is crucial because one wrong observation, there's a possibility that in the next instruction, Ruth will lie down to a wrong man. So Ruth should be attentive, should be in that moment, and should be observant. Then further, the instruction of Naomi, go and uncover his feet, lie down, and he will tell you what to do. This is their custom during their time. This is a woman saying, marry me. So this is the instruction. And notice the reply of Ruth. All that you say, I will do. Sometimes you will ask, is it worth it? The risk is high being caught, and the risk of slight mistake that you will lay in a wrong guy is high as well. So the risk is there. Is it really worth it? In verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and covered his feet and lay down. So here is now the picture of Ruth sneaking in. She came softly and covered his feet and laying down. I would like you to take notice that their body position while laying down is letter T. Ruth lay by Boaz's feet, not his side, for that would have been immodest during their time. So this is also a picture of Ruth in full submission to Boaz. This is an act of submission, lying at the feet or the foot of his bed as a servant would lay at the master's feet. So Ruth offers herself to Boaz to take as his wife. So you may wonder what will be the reaction of Boaz after this. In verse 8, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Oh, boom, what is going on here? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a woman lying at Boaz's feet. Notice further the reaction of Boaz in verse 9. He said, "Who are you?" Nahuyo siya, no? "Who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Notice the response of Ruth. First, in humble submission. Notice the word, "I am your servant." Over your servant. Ruth is aware of who she is. A Moabite. A sinner. Cursed. Now here Ruth display a picture of her in humble submission to the Redeemer. This is a remarkable character of a changed life, a true convert. Ruth has a potential to brag herself as beautiful, as young towards Boaz, but here Ruth showed how it is to receive that kind of love from Boaz. So here is now the character of a true convert. Let's pause there for a moment. We are commanded to not be unequally yoked with unbeliever. So the question now is, how do we know if someone is a true convert? Here, Boaz is a Christian, Ruth is a newly converted, and we can see to the response of Ruth that she's a genuine convert. How will you know that someone is a real convert? Maybe you'll reason out, I'll just bring him or her to church. Of course, that person whose desire is towards you, not towards God, will always come to church because primarily that person's aim is to please you, not God. So expectedly, you'll see that someone kept coming to church. And maybe you'll reason, there's stories of people in relationship being converted along the process. Yes, that's true, and we thank God for that. But there's also sad stories of people in relationship being separated due to theological issues. And there are lots of stories, sad stories like that. So the question is it worth it? Is it worth it? You will reason out, it's hard to find right man or woman inside the church. Now I'll ask you, do you intentionally know them beyond appearance? Like what Boaz see in Ruth, a noble woman. Like Ruth sees how noble Boaz is. Further question, is Christ's worth that easy to neglect in exchange to that unconverted individual whose delight wavers, unchanging, and insecure? Are you searching for pleasure and meaning in ways contrary to God's plan? Are you trying to write the story of your own glory with your life? And notice this, intimacy is impossible without spiritual unity. I'll repeat that. Intimacy is impossible without spiritual unity. There's no fellowship between light and darkness. So what did Boaz and Ruth respond further? She said, I am your servant. Spread your wings. And notice this. Spread your wings. This appears in the 2nd chapter and verse 12 in the book of Ruth as Boaz prayed for Ruth. And here's now in chapter 3 verse 9, Ruth is saying, I am the answer to that prayer. Spread your wings. So now the question is, do we pray for him or her? Or do we put ourselves in a position that I'm the answer to your prayer by protecting her, honoring her, not doing that trust drive thing, playing with her emotion, going into that place of assumption, assuming everything, and then the girl freaks out what is going on? This is Boaz. Respond rightly in verse 10, and he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young man, whether poor or rich. Notice the response of Boaz. He didn't take advantage of the situation. The setting is in the middle of the night. Then all of a sudden, there's a woman lying at his feet. He responds rightly, though the temptation is high. And Boaz said further, you have made this last kindness greater than the first. The kindness here is from the Hebrew word means hesed. It means loyal love. Boaz feels undeserved to receive that kind of love from Ruth. For he probably sees himself as old, and the risk of Ruth becoming a widow for the second time is high. And he sees other qualified men for Ruth. He says, you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. He sees other qualified men for Ruth. Yet Ruth remained loyal to him. And Boaz responds to that kind of love, that loyal love, he feels undeserving. Who am I to receive this kind of covenantal love that never wavers? And then Boaz said further, and now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you asked, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. No, he said, do not fear, because I will do for you all, notice this, that you asked. So now Boaz is aware that Ruth is following the instruction of Naomi. It's very obvious because Ruth is a Moabite woman, and this is not their custom. And Boaz is aware that she is in full submission as well to the instruction of Naomi. So here is now a remarkable character again displayed through the life of Boaz, that she protects not just Ruth, but also Naomi. He wanted to protect Ruth. He said, I will do for you all the command that being given to Ruth by Naomi. And also, Boaz wanted to protect Ruth from people. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Ruth already built this kind of character. She's a worthy woman. When people find out that Ruth is now in the threshing floor, that the risk is high, what would people say? What is she doing there in the first place? So Boaz wanted to protect further Ruth. And notice the response further of Boaz in verse 12. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yes, Ruth, I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Oh no. Wrong move. Boaz is aware that there is someone qualified than him. But notice his response from the start at this moment. He responds rightly. He don't take advantage of Ruth. He don't take advantage of the miscommunication and the misinformation. He responds rightly. You'll notice the effect of this when this spread out. Naomi, who gave the command, a well-known individual within the town. The Ruth, the Moabite woman with good reputation. And also the Redeemer, the other guy, who is a victim of a wrong process. But Boaz, in verse 13, he said, remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good. Let's pause there for a moment. So Boaz further protects them. He acts rightly again in the most tempting moment. So here's now the question. For men, especially single men, do we protect our sisters in Christ? Do we continually honor them with the possibility that one of them will be our potential wife? Do we honor their parents as well? How we relate to them? Do we travel in the path of testing the waters? Assuming miscommunication that causes so much emotional confusion in her part? Do we communicate clearly or we just assume? The question here for all of us, are we good steward of one another? Do we honor them? Do we continually and consistently show clarity and purity in how we relate to one another? Or do we play, for single men, that lover boy card? Or for other men, that lovable card? Here, Boaz demonstrates a remarkable character to protect women. What a display of character in the life of Boaz. Another question. When we don't get what we want, in verse 13. But he is not willing to redeem you. Then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. This is a hard statement for Boaz. If he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. I will submit to the will of God. If not, as long as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Notice the response and the character of Boaz in this line. Boaz is fully aware that he needs to align his emotion to the will of God. What is the display of character? When we don't get what we want, do you want God to align in our own carnal will? Lord, ikaw mag-adjust. Or the worst, we bang the door and put on a sign for God, no entry. Here, Boaz fully submit to the will of God, even though emotionally it is torture. And then, notice the action of Boaz further. Lie down until the morning. He continues to protect Ruth, even though there's a possibility that he can't get something out from this. But he demonstrates in showing love towards Ruth to protect her. In verse 14, so she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before, notice this, one could recognize another. There she continually protect Ruth. And she said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Remember the risk of Ruth being there? Boaz didn't stop there. Boaz goes further. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. Ruth had done all that was fit for her to do. But here, Boaz continued to provide, not just for Ruth, but also for Naomi. In verse 16, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, the 6 measure of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back, notice this, empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Notice the concern of Boaz, not just to Ruth, but also to Naomi. Boaz's concern is for not Ruth to return nothing, because he is aware that Ruth is following the instruction of Naomi, and now Boaz is giving a message to Naomi. In verse 18, she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Boaz has deep concern as well for Naomi, thus the provision of 6 measures of barley. Now Boaz display here another wonderful character. He honors the authority in the life of Ruth, and that is Naomi. Boaz is giving message to Naomi that you can trust me. I am a man of honor. I am a man of word. Therefore, the reaction of Naomi, wait, my daughter, until you have learned how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. What kind of trust is that towards Boaz? So the question here, especially for single men, do we honor the parents of this potential wife that we are praying to? Do we honor them? Or we just shortcut the process? We go directly to the daughter without going to the parents? Boaz continued to be a good steward of one another. And this is a remarkable character of Boaz saying to Naomi, I am serious. Boaz is not there to play around, playing the emotion of Ruth, taking advantage of the moment, of the circumstances. But Boaz is a man of character, displaying respect, protection, and love towards Ruth and Naomi. So this is the end of verse 18. So we'll ask, where's the gospel here? Do you remember what Boaz said towards Ruth? That I am not deserving of that loyal love that you have given unto me. And Naomi consistently display acts of selfishness, emptying herself towards other. Boaz continuously display acts of mercy towards Ruth. Boaz don't use Ruth's background, that she's a sinner, she's a Moabite, but Boaz continually pour out mercy. And we saw that in the life of Jesus. God continually gave us mercy and grace, and later on to the life of Jesus. And Jesus poured out his life towards undeserving sinners, you and me. Sin that violates God, sin that alienates us to the will of God. Here's now God sending his Son and welcomes us. I am your Redeemer. It doesn't matter that sin that you are holding. I already paid the price on the cross. It is finished. It is done. All we need to do is just like Ruth, to drop everything, that radical abandonment, to turn from life of sin and walk into the promised land, the house of bread, the bread of life, and turn to God and repent. And there, God show continually his covenantal love to his people. And when you stand in a courtroom, you are guilty of sin. You're guilty of violating a rule, a law. And then here comes someone else in your place. And that's Christ in our place, nailed on the cross. When you look at the cross, what do you see? Do you see yourself as worthy of that act? Or do you see yourself just like Ruth's question? Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me? A sinner, alienated in your will, who rebels against you. Yet God, full of mercy, displays acts of selflessness, acts of mercy towards sinners like you and me, and welcomes us and redeems us to his covenantal love until eternity. Here in this story, hope and joy comes in unexpected ways. And it's leaning on the finished work of Christ that finally undoes our desire for fulfillment apart from him. So that is the word for today, and let us pray.